Says the budget will give some relief to beneficiaries, but she told reporter Lois Williams the government's ignored the recommendation for a 47% increase in baseline benefits in its recent welfare review. She said that review should have rung loud alarm bells in Parliament.
It shows that since the mother of all budgets, remember Ruth Richardson, that was when the benefits were reduced to barely livable. And no government since then have really ever brought back that level of parity between the benefit level and the minimum wage. So that has been, about almost 30 years now, coming up to 30 years. And so in that time we've had intergenerational poverty that has come from that ruthless reduction in the safety net in our society.
So what were you hoping for?
I was hopeful for 47%, to tell you the truth. A lot of our clients are struggling to survive on a day-to-day level. You put in an accident or an unexpected expense like a vehicle breakdown, and then next minute they've got no fallback for the next week's expenses.
Yeah, but the government has indexed benefit levels to the annual average wage increases, hasn't it? I mean, that's got to be some help, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. But when you're starting from such a low level, it's a little bit of a smack in the face, really. Great, should have been done a long time ago. But if you're starting on a low rate, 3 or 4% of not very much doesn't amount to much.
Well, with us now is the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
What would you say to those women?
Oh, look, I absolutely accept, particularly if we talk about the citizens' advice person at the end there, that there has been a long record of, low-income New Zealanders not receiving what they need. That's what motivated us last year to say no to tax cuts and yes to investing in a families package that's going to make families like the one that we heard in the first cut far better off, $75 a week on average. Beneficiaries have been eligible for all of those things as well. Now we take some further steps in this budget. The Welfare Expert Advisory Group, we've said we are going to make, the commitments we've made. So that's indexation. It's also around getting rid of the punitive sanctions on women who don't name their partners, and also making sure that the abatement rate increases. So if you go into work, you keep more of your money.
None of that is coming in until April.
Yeah, that's right. But that's the way it works when you're changing benefits. We've seen what happens if you don't give yourself the time to make sure you get that right. But then the next phase of work is to look at the rest of the recommendations of that report.
Okay,
but so we bring this in. We're bringing this in phases. We've been upfront about that, and we are talking about $320 million that'll be going into those households because we've taken that decision to do indexation.
Talking specifically though about those decisions about the indexing of benefit levels, that does seem pretty meagre when you've got that backdrop of the welfare report that says that they need to go up by 47%. So what are you doing that's addressing endemic poverty in this budget?
Well, in this budget, we're building on what we did with the families package. That doesn't just stop. That rolls out and continues to roll out and ends up being $75 per week for the families that are receiving that. That's significant. It's also significant that we are finally doing what Andrew Beecroft said would be the thing that had the best thing we could do for child poverty was the indexation of benefits, and we did that yesterday. So we're building the blocks here of lifting incomes. We're lifting the minimum wage.
But isn't it
we're making
enough,
it easier
though,
for low-income people to go to the doctor.
That a working class family might not see an awful lot in the budget for them.
Well, no, I think when people look at the budget as a whole, they'll see that we're finally addressing issues like mental health, which is a long-term crisis that affects all New Zealanders. They'll see that we're going to put an extra $1 billion into building the best schools for their kids to go to. That we're actually spending, $850 million a year each year for the next 2 years on fixing the hospitals. These are the things that we know we need to do in New Zealand. These are long-term challenges, Susie. They didn't just arrive overnight.
And mental health is a big win. But what happens in the interim? That money's over 5 years. What happens in the interim when the counsellors and the psychologists are still being trained?
Yep, and look, we continue to try to offer the services that we can now, but we can't invent it overnight. This crisis.
But are you going to be bolstering this by looking, for example, at apps or online support for people?
Absolutely, and the 1737 number, the telehealth work that's gone on for mental health has really helped a lot of people, and those services are there now. But this is the issue. The mental health crisis in New Zealand has been ignored for decades. We now have a plan, a substantial substantial plan to fix that. Yes, it will take time. That's what happens with long-term challenges. But what's the alternative, Susie? The alternative is to go along ignoring mental health as the previous government did. We're not prepared to do that.
Something else you've talked about in the past, which goes back to perhaps the working class, the middle class person. Everyone deserves a warm, dry home, you say. There's nothing in the budget about Kiwi Build. There's nothing in the budget about state housing.
Well, in terms of Kiwi Build, we put $2 billion in the budget for the lifetime of the program last year. So that money's there.
And how many homes do you have for it?
And that money is there and being spent. And as you well know, there's going to be a reset of that. But in the budget, there's also significant funding for transitional housing, over $200 million, nearly $200 million for the Housing First program.
But
and of course,
are you
we're
being
still
too
building
fiscally tight when we know there's not enough housing stock? Are you being too fiscally tight? Is this not the time to borrow?
Well, we are borrowing, but
we
more
are, than you are.
No, well, I believe that we've got a good housing program. There is a reset coming, and we have put money aside in the budget for that, and that'll be announced in due course. But I believe
when can we expect that?
It's coming up soon.
What soon?
Well, that's up to Minister Twyford to announce.
But are we talking days or weeks?
Well, that's up to him to announce.
Let's talk about some of the surrounding issues to the budget. The picture on the front of it, the budget with pictures, the mum and daughter. You said when the mum saw what was the content of the budget rather than the front cover of the budget, that she'd want to come home. We've heard from her on the programme this morning. She says she doesn't because rents are too high and the pay's too low. Is she wrong?
Well, no, I believe if she takes a good look at it, I'm sure she'll think that. Pay's going up in New Zealand. Wages are going to increase by 3.4%. That's what the budget says. We are lifting the minimum wage as well. We are building more housing. So there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic here and plenty of reasons for that person to come home.
But are rents going to drop?
Well, rents go up. That's the reality of life. They've always gone up
so
that
this
way.
Doesn't
but
help her.
The way we address that is by building more houses, which we are doing. And the way we address that is by making sure that the other issues that she's got by investing in all of the things that will make it easier, including lifting wages. That's happening. Wages are lifting in this budget.
Nothing specifically for teachers either in the budget, although there are some other aspects to education that perhaps help classrooms, help children. But you've got a pretty intractable looking dispute with the teachers. Was this not an opportunity to break the deadlock?
There's a $1.2 billion offer on the table. We also in this budget addressed a number of the issues that teachers are raising. 600 learning support coordinators, what we used to call special needs, in there to take that pressure off teachers.
So do you think this will break the deadlock?
No, what has to happen now, and what I know is happening now, is we've had the strike. Now we sit down again with the unions and we work through what's possible, and that's important. That's what you should always do. That's the work that's going on. But I believe what's in the budget, $1.2 billion for school classrooms, more teachers coming into the system, support around particular areas of the curriculum. There is a lot in this budget that addresses the issues that teachers want beyond pay.
Can we also talk about the situation with Treasury and its Secretary Gabriel Makhlouf? Simon Bridges said Treasury knew what was going on Tuesday. That was the day they put out the statement saying that it had been a hack. Wednesday morning was when Gabriel Makhlouf was doing interviews about this. When did you find out the real story?
I found it out very late on Wednesday night that there would be statements going out on Thursday morning.
So do you understand that Treasury knew about it the day before and didn't tell you?
No, I don't have that information. The State Services Commissioner is now conducting an inquiry and I'm sure you'll find all of that out then.
But is Simon Bridges wrong when he says that Treasury knew the situation on Tuesday?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that. On Tuesday evening, the Secretary of the Treasury arrived in my office to tell me that he had already referred to the police what he described as 2,000 attempts to hack into the Treasury system. I think you can imagine, as the Minister of Finance, how I felt about that, and that's the information I acted on and that advice I acted on.
Considering how this has gone down, has he apologised?
Sensibly, I think he left me to focus on the budget yesterday, and I actually think that's what New Zealanders want.
So he didn't even take you aside and say, I'm really sorry the way this has all played out?
He'd already said earlier in the week that he was sorry for the fact that it had happened. But the reality is, Susie, that what the people... Now, let me finish this.
Did he apologise to you on Tuesday?
I want to finish this because it's a really important point. The people listening to this station want to know what a government is doing to fix mental health, to build infrastructure, to do better by our kids. That's been my focus this week because that's what New Zealanders would expect of me.
Has he offered his resignation?
That's a matter between him and the State Services Commissioner, who's his employer.
So you don't know?
You'd need to ask Mr Hughes.
OK. do you think he should be sacked?
There is an investigation taking place now. What I do want to say is that the Treasury have done a superb job of putting a new type of budget together here. This Wellbeing Budget is very different from how we've done budgets in the past. It looks to those long-term challenges. It's got agencies working together, and I think actually we've done a pretty good job with the Treasury's help of putting that budget together.
Do you have full confidence in Gabriel Makhlouf?
I've got confidence in what's happened up to now, but we'll wait and see what the inquiry says.
So you can't give your full confidence to him now, this
I've
morning?
got confidence in the work that's been done in putting this budget together, but
you can't give it to him.
terms of the issues around the system, that's what the inquiry's for.
Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much. That is the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. It is 11 minutes to 8.
And lots of feedback coming in on the budget this morning. This one from Nick Hamilton, his take on the wellbeing tag. My wellbeing would improve.